Good evening. I'm going to call this January 15th Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Start out with roll call. John Bachman. Here. And we have two commissioners who are joining us online. I'm going to call on them and have them try to say something so we can also test out the mic. So Sudha and Kara.
Good evening and Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I'm here.
Thanks, Sudha. We can hear you. How about Hisham El-Kawad?
Good evening, too, and Happy New Year, too. I'm here.
Great. We can hear you too, Hisham. Mike Bresco.
I'm here.
Ajay Chakrapani.
I'm here.
Syed Safavian.
I'm here.
And I am Mark Boffman, and I am here. Next is approval of the agenda, and this evening we're going to be talking about impact fees and the code that goes with them. Any comments on the agenda? Okay, we'll call the agenda approved. Next is approval of the meeting minutes from our December 4th meeting. Anybody have any comments or corrections to the meeting minutes from the December 4th meeting? Okay, so we'll call the meeting minutes approved. Next is a little bit of recognition. Who's doing that?
I'll start. So,
David.
This evening we wanted to recognize Mark Boffman, our outgoing planning commissioner, and you've been the chair of the commission for what, going on 6 years now? Mark has, maybe 7 years. Mark has seen a wide range of issues come before the planning commission and has presided over those meetings. And we really are appreciative of the even approach Mark has taken to try to make sure that all the planning commissioners have equal opportunity to provide comments. The approach that he takes in receiving public comment from the community and making community members feel welcome at planning commission meetings. His approach in working with staff in trying to help us prepare for meetings and do better in presenting to the planning commission and understand the topics before the meeting so that we're able to do a better job, hopefully supporting the commission and the work that it does. So overall, just really thankful for the time we've had with Mark, appreciative of his time. And I know he's looking forward to do something else likely, but we'll miss him. So we do have a gift for Mark. And we wanted to take a minute and to provide this gift to you and then maybe recess for 10 minutes and have a treat and then go back to business if that's okay with the commission.
Any objections? Nope. Okay.
You had us a treat.
I object. How am I going to get the treat virtually? Me and Hisham, we object.
We're dropping it in the mail right now.
Thank you.
We'll send a piece via FedEx.
Okay, let's do, how long do you want to do? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? 10 minutes is fine. We can 10 minutes. Take a picture with the group. So it is 6:35 now. We'll come back at 6:45. Okay, let's get started again here. Thanks for the kind words and the cupcake. I appreciate it. Let's move on to our public comment period. Would anyone in the room like to make public comment for this evening? Michael.
Okay, that's better. But my wife said I've been droning on way too much about that, so I thought I'd give everyone a break and talk a little bit about the future growth in Sammamish. In October and September, it was really easy to think that it was all about choosing the city council. And I wrote something up which I sent in, basically pointing out that regional factors are very important in what's going to happen with the growth in Sammamish, although the city council may still have a little bit to do with it. So, for example, in 2024, which is the last year that we have good numbers, Redmond grew by 2,340 people. Sammamish grew by 70. This is not a total accident, given what's going on in the region. 10 years ago, I know it's hard to believe, Sammamish and Redmond were the same size in population. That will never happen again. Over the last 5 years, Redmond has added housing and people at a rate 10 times faster than Sammamish. So, given a discrepancy like that, what does the future look like? Well, today, Redmond is already 20% bigger than Sammamish. Sammamish, looking forward, has a 20-year growth target, which some people have said is way too high, of 2,100 people. Redmond, 2,100 units of housing. Redmond, 20,000. And at current growth rates, they'll achieve that. They'll have 20,000 more houses than they do now by 2044. Sammamish also, at its current rate, depending a little bit on how you extrapolate, may be able to hit its growth target at a mere 2,000 units. So during the last 4 years, we've actually had a pro-growth city council in Sammamish. How did this happen? Well, we live in a region. It's not just the decisions that we make in Sammamish. Redmond's a great place for growth. Many of the advantages you know, it's got easily developable land. It's flat. It's not so impeded by geography. It's got direct freeway access. It now has a light rail train service. It had high-paying jobs inside the city already, and we can't forget, it did have support for development that we didn't see in Sammamish. So last November's Sammamish voters looked at the benefits and costs of rapid urbanization like Redmond has experienced. We chose to go slow, and that is likely to happen.
Thanks, Richard. Who else in the room? Paul?
Sorry, I can't give it to anybody online, but I'm sending in an electronic copy. Here's two for you. Yeah, this. Great. Yeah, taking that one. That's weird. Oh, you got the Kleenex up here so that we can cry at your last meeting. Anyway, good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Just a couple snippets on some of the stuff I turned in today and what I'm going to be sending you of copies of what I gave City Council the last two meetings. So the first couple of pages is just a written copy of my notes on impact fees. And I followed impact fees back in 2014, so I know a thing or three. Some of the comments that I'm made here, and I'm not going to say I know everything because there's a lot of new approaches that are happening, but what caught my eye were issues between single-family and multifamily population per unit, trips generated if they're in centers or not in centers should be changed. I didn't see much in there on how much the impact fees are for 30, 50, or 80% AMI units, and maybe I missed that. I didn't understand why the town center road projects were all at 100% impact eligible, and if that means that the only people that will use them are town center residents, that's false. If that's not what it means, then it's okay. But if it is what it means, that needs to change. On the parks side of things, we have added tremendous amount of parks since we incorporated it. I'm in favor of that. There's a lot of open space, but I don't agree with the per person increase of a linear nature from what we've done in the past for new people coming in. I don't believe the community needs a lot of new parks. We have a lot of parks. We're well planned on that. So I'm not saying no to parks in any way, shape, or form. I just think that the amount of incremental increase won't be the same pace as we've increased since incorporation. The other pages here are two comments I gave to the City Council. One on January 6th, and I am going to email you what I sent them, and it was a lot of stuff. I did not send that in advance. You have a lot to do tonight. All I want to do is let you know that I'm going to be sending it. And what I gave the City Council on the on January the 6th was a document about action steps that can add holistic added enrichments across the board and how to make that happen, with a compilation of a lot of background material, nowhere near everything, but the big stuff. And on the 13th, I gave information about false premise or non-authentic data that went into comp plan and growth target that needs to be changed to authentic data and then reassessed and consider internal needs besides regional growth combined. So I'll be sending that in. So Mark, sad to see you go. And I was hoping Mary would be on tonight. Maybe she'll come in and say goodbye to you. All right.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else in the room? Lena, anybody on the team, on the meeting?
I do not see any hands raised online.
Well, if Mary watches this later, yeah. Thanks for your comments in the past, Mary. Okay, let's move on to our item of old business, which is discussion of the report and draft code for the revised impact fees. Is this David or you, Evan?
It will be me. Screen is successfully shared and we're ready to get going. Sorry, just orienting my screens here. So tonight we'll be continuing our conversation on impact fees, and the presentation will be broken into two parts. So the first part, what we want to do is review at a high level what impact fees are and the scaling methodology that our consultant FCS helped us come up with to implement the new scaling impact fees. We'll pause after that brief presentation, and the goal is to hear your questions and feedback about the report that was included as Exhibit 1, and also just general questions that you might have still about the methodologies. David and I will do our best to answer kind of high-level questions here. If things get more complicated or technical, we'll take those back to folks and provide written responses in the Q&A matrix in the future. But so we'll go through that. And then the second part of the presentation, we'll go through an overview of the new draft SMC 2106045 impact fees code section. So, and then we'll go through the same feedback and question process. And then lastly, we'll just take a moment to look ahead to the public hearing and what the Planning Commission has coming up next. Just as a reminder, this is now our fourth visit with impact fees. Over the summer, we did a high-level, Audrey and David provided a high-level presentation of what impact fees are and spent some time talking about the infrastructure and the capital improvements that they support. In September, we came back and we went through our Marksburg example to try to break down at a simple-ish level how you convert impact fees to be scalable in response to changes in state law. In November, FCS, our consultant, provided a presentation detailing their methodologies, and they walked through the different inputs into the formulas and answered some questions about how they got there. And today we're here to do our review. Coming up, we have a check-in with the council on February 3rd, where we'll get a little feedback and direction from them. And then once we know kind of what work is going to be coming from the council on this topic, we'll look to schedule either another workshop with the Planning Commission or move to a public hearing, just depending on where we are with things. So that's kind of a look ahead. So just to take it back at a high level, what are impact fees? At the simplest form, they're a one-time charge on new development to help pay for additional infrastructure to support that new development. They're used to fund capital infrastructure that's spelled out in our comprehensive plan, and they can be used for things like parks, schools, transportation, and fire. We do parks, schools, and transportation impact fees, and as we've talked about, we just collect impact fees on behalf of the school districts. They come up with their own formula for calculating the fees based on their own facilities plans. We just are kind of a pass-through of collecting that fee and moving it on. So impact fees, the authority to do so comes from RCW 8202-050 through 110. And it says that cities under the Growth Management Act may collect impact fees to, as we stated, support the development of new systems related to new development. And the key here is that it must be a proportionate share. Impact fees can't support the full funding of projects on the facilities list. And also I've underlined and italicized the may collect impact fees. It is a choice. And part of what we're going to do with the commission and with the city council is what we'll be presenting is what FCS thinks is the maximum impact fee we could assess defensively. Then it's a local policy choice to choose how much of that maximum fee we want to assess. We could choose to assess all of it or some percentage in between all the way to nothing. So that's part of the conversation that something to think about as a group and make a recommendation to the council who will ultimately decide how to implement impact fees. So currently impact fees are assessed on a per unit basis. It's a flat fee, whether you're building a 700 square foot cottage or a 5,000 square foot Rambler. And as you see, our fees are at the higher end of fees compared to peer and neighboring cities. With single family for streets around 14,000 and parks around near 7,000. So that's kind of what we're working with now. And there are a couple of reasons why we need to update the fees and also why it's just a good time to update the fees. First is the state Senate passed a bill in 2023 requiring that impact fees shift from a per unit basis to some scaling methodology. So the fees would scale with the size of development. Smaller units would pay a smaller fee, larger units would pay a larger fee. They provided 3 different methodologies for jurisdictions to choose how to do this, either through square footage, bedroom count, or trip generation rates. And the idea behind it was ultimately to encourage smaller, more affordable housing. On a different parallel track, the districts are working with the county to create scalable fees for school districts, and they're using the bedroom count method as just a different example of how to assess and estimate occupancy. It also just makes sense to update the fees. They haven't been updated since 2015, so the methodology is stale and the inputs are a little stale. And with the adoption of the 2024 comprehensive plan and all the other planning work that went into it, so the climate action plan, the housing diversification toolkit, the transit plan, PROS plan, we have plans up the wazoo. So it makes sense now that we have all this great policy in place to reset the fees and move forward on a new track. And I think a key thing here in how we've, as the project manager of this project, how I think about this is ultimately what we're trying to produce is a fee structure that is legally defensible. And there's a lot of case law, which I think we linked to some examples in the agenda bill to MSRC that describe different cases and how nexus and proportionality are determined. And what FCS, our consultant, was tasked to do was provide us a legally defensible methodology for imposing impact fees. And I think what they've presented accomplishes that. And that's just a good way to help kind of frame some of the decisions we make around implementing the fees. So at a high level, we want to just run back through the basics of the formulas used to create the impact fees. Both the parks and transportation fees are based on looking at the capital project lists, growth estimates, and are used then to derive a fee amount. So in the case of transportation impact fees, we look at the capital projects list, which was included and adopted by reference through the comp plan by way of the TMP. We look at growth trips, growth in new person trips, and essentially this uses the comprehensive plan's growth methodology of assuming 2,100 units of new growth, which translates to about 6,000 people. And it says, okay, that's our growth estimate for 20 years. We divide that by the cost of our projects, and that gives us a fee amount. And I think it's helpful to pause here for just a second and look at the projects list, because we've gotten some really good questions from commissioners about the inputs here on the project list. And I think it's a fair conversation to have. And they're really good questions about why does, TR-L, why is that coming to, $15.7 million, but 0% eligibility? Ultimately, what this list is providing us for our purposes here tonight is an output in the bottom right-hand corner. And what that output is the amount of the capital projects that are eligible for funding through transportation impact fees. And eligibility for each project has been assessed by DKS, one of our transportation consultants. And what they do essentially is look how much of this project will be built to support new growth. So the projects that are rated 100% are projects that don't exist today. So when they get built, they're fully there to support new growth. The projects that have a smaller percentage means maybe you're adding on some multimodal systems or lanes of travel that will support new growth in the future. But the road already exists. The main pipeline already exists. You might be adding a small improvement. So there's an analysis method that DKS uses to assess how much each project is eligible to support impact fees. But that's a bit granular. Ultimately, the bottom right corner is the output of this table that we kind of want to focus on. Go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing to consider is with this table is that this table will change periodically as the city continues to plan for the future, as we continue to refine what the city's priorities are, as we continue to build new projects and learn where additional work and funds need to be spent to build out the network. So this is a snapshot in time of these projects and what we understand their eligibility to be. We are in the process of making some refinements to this list. Our transportation staff are working on, what's the right word for it? Accounting for a new ped bike plan, a transit plan, updates to the transportation master plan. There's a whole host of changes that are underway right now, and those will likely result in this list being changed in about 2 years. So if we did go through the process of adopting impact fees, and by the way, we're overdue. They were due last year, so we are legally non-compliant with the state law on impact fees. So we're overdue. I don't think there's a lot of risk there as long as we get it done this year. But we anticipate that in probably 2 years, we will come back again and not change the formula, but instead we will swap out this table with a new table that is more refined and that is reflective of priorities that the council has given us, that the community has identified, and the methodology to rank those, ensure equity, try to identify the best value for the dollars that we have. So this piece of information and the parks comparable piece of information, the parks table, is also subject to change as we continue to evaluate how to invest public dollars in infrastructure. So I wanted to really highlight that. That came out of a conversation with a commissioner, and we really appreciated the feedback on that, but we wanted to clarify that this table will change. And at that time, we will take the new output and we will input that into the formula, and it will generate a new impact fee that then the council will consider adopting through the fee schedule. So that is how this works. And one of the challenges in the past was that when it was last adopted, and the code that we have had doesn't really contemplate how this is updated in the future. We're really trying to address that here and make sure that we're forward thinking. How does it adjust for inflation? How does it adjust periodically at the council's discretion if they choose to want to increase the fees? How does it adjust related to the table here? Really important piece of this. One other thing before we get into the formula is I wanted to also highlight that impact fees are not the only way in which development provides infrastructure to the city. Development also builds infrastructure that is within the development. So for a subdivision, I think we're all familiar with Highcroft or the Connor Jarvis project that went in, that there are roads, there are sewer, water mains that are extended through the development. There are pocket parks, that are developed, that are open to the public. There are trail connections that are brought through the development. Those are another way in which development pays for development, so to speak, and that it's required to provide infrastructure alongside the construction of the project or with the construction of the project. There is one more way in which development provides for improvements in infrastructure, and that is through the State Environmental Policy Act. And when we do a SEPA analysis, there are occasions, it's not as common, but there are occasions where a system deficiency is identified, that is, where there's a nexus or connection to the project, that the project going forward would result in a safety degradation at an intersection, a delay at an intersection, or some other form of improvement that needs to be made within proximity of the development, but not within the development, if that makes sense. So through the State Environmental Policy Act, we apply mitigation measures and we obligate the developer to build other improvements that are not funded by impact fees and that are not immediately within the development, but that are necessary to support that development to ensure that our levels of service and our infrastructure standards regarding safety remain. So hopefully that made sense. I wanted to highlight that there are three really primary ways in which development helps build and fund infrastructure.
Next is an overview of the formula of the parks fee calculation. And here you use the value of the existing parks inventory and the improvements made to derive parks capital value per person. Then you run it through another formula with estimations of the population growth that match the time span of the project list. Then you look at the percentage of the projects that are eligible for impact fees. You have to consider the other funding sources that would be available to support those project development. And ultimately after all that, you get to the bottom right-hand corner that pops out a parks impact fee. And that's something that FCS ran through in more detail on November 6th. So if you have more questions, I would recommend watching that excellent video because I think I did all I can do on that. So, but we'll move on. And this table here shows us the end product of running those calculations. It generates a new fee for parks and transportation. And in the red boxes there are the scaling fee amounts. So under parks, that top red box, we have a per square foot rate of $3.13 and transportation of $7.44. We also talked about how the scaling methodology came up with a minimum and maximum square footage for charging impact fees and an amount associated with that. And that was using occupancy data from the region, that data they could gather through the American Community Survey and census data to estimate. Again, it's an estimation of the number of people kind of per square foot to give us a minimum and maximum amount we can charge defensively for impact fees. To put it in context, we wanted to bring back a comparison to neighboring and peer cities, and this isn't fully current in that some of these cities have yet to implement scaling methodologies and some have, but you can see how our newly calculated fees are ultimately pretty similar to our existing fee amounts at their base value, and that's before you apply scaling. But I think it's helpful to see it in context. FCS produced a report that captures a methodology, and ideally you'd be able to read that report from top to bottom and understand fully each of the inputs and the data and the decisions made about the fees and how they were calculated. The report will be incorporated by reference in the draft code that we're going to show at the second part of the presentation. With the idea being that instead of trying to codify the formula and put it in code where it's hard to change and it would take a long, cumbersome process to do it, referencing it out to this report gives us a little bit more flexibility when the time comes when we're ready to hit recalculate, when we might have a new project list. So that's the idea behind keeping the report as a reference versus codifying the formulas. And what we're looking for is the commission had some time with the report. So really we want your feedback on how it reads. We got some emails from folks about sections for additional clarification, which we appreciate and we'll pass on to our consultant. And then just what questions or thoughts you have. So we'll pause there for questions. And I think David.
I also, in addition to the comments this evening from the public, I did want to draw your attention to a letter that was received from the master builders. And the general gist of that letter is that they'd like to see us consider impact fee reductions for 30 to 80% area median income housing developments. Currently, the way it's proposed, we are waiving impact fees for, we're proposing to waive impact fees for projects that have a 0 to 30% deep affordability, as those generally are public policy driven. They're partially publicly funded, publicly coordinated. However, the 30 to 80% range is an area of opportunity that if the commission wanted to recommend to the council a reduced fee instead of a waiver, that might be appropriate. But I did want to highlight that letter. We're also being commended on some of the code language that we have and some of the provisions around flexibility for deferral and credit for other like improvements in that letter, just the same. So I wanted to provide a summary of what that letter says.
So you're looking for comments so far? Yep. Anybody want to make comments so far? Syed, go ahead.
Couple of simple things. The list that with the numbers, 100% and all that. The list of 4 projects down the bottom, I don't know if there's any significance as far as they don't have the project number. What does that mean? There are 4 projects down the bottom? I don't know.
We'd be happy to ask our transportation counterparts. Thank you.
Question about the guidelines that we have right now. If the developer is committed to make the frontage improvement, can they use that in lieu of the impact fee?
They cannot. However, if they continue a frontage improvement off-site in anticipation of other development that will likely come soon, they can get credit for that, much like a latecomer you would get.
Exactly what I was going to get into it. The latecomer agreement is available. You may want to explain what is the latecomer agreement.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to understand that is in the case of a development that requires a sewer extension to service the development. So, say you want to develop a property that is a few hundred feet north of where the sewer main currently ends, you would be required to extend the public sewer main to the extent of the property, the boundary of the property, whereby you could then connect your new development to that sewer main, and you would be obligated to build the entire extension of that sewer main. However, you would be eligible as a developer over time to receive credit back or payment back for that investment from latecomer payments. So if one of the neighbors who then would take advantage of that sewer line down the road from you was to develop, they would be required to, at the point of connection, pay their proportionate share of the development of that sewer line. A similar line of thinking is in impact fees. We have system credits. Instead of latecomer, it has a different terminology. There is a section in our draft code that's included, I think is Exhibit 2, that does talk about how that would work in the case where somebody built additional improvements as part of their development that they could then be credited back for. They can credit it against their impact fees, or we could set it up as a latecomer. It wouldn't be in the impact fee chapter because it's managed a different way.
And this latecomer agreement or offsite improvement that we were talking about, if the developer is willing to, doesn't have to be adjacent to the property, does it?
No, it does not. It has to be within a reasonable geographic proximity.
Because I remember a case that we had to deal with it in Bothell, that we conditioned approval of the plan based on the signal, installation of a signal only 4 or 5 blocks away, but there was a nexus between the development and the improvement to that intersection, and they had to pay for the signalization of that intersection. That's why I brought it up. Back to the offsite improvement. In addition to the offsite improvement, what happens to the additional dedication of right-of-way that is required?
So dedication of right-of-way would typically be required immediately in front of a project. We can't require a developer to dedicate right-of-way from land they don't own. So dedication usually occurs right along the frontage of a property where it fronts a public road, and there is a plan to widen that road for the proper road section. So dedication is required, and that's a fourth way. That's a really good point. So dedication is required in addition to impact fees, site improvements, and other SEPA mitigation improvements.
I'm just getting to it one by one. So back to that. Let's say the developer is obligated to provide for at his or her own cost and dedicate right away and pay for the impact fee. And on the top of that, maybe additional requirements through the SEPA, right? All of the above.
Correct.
There one slide to talk about the blended impact fee. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean?
I'll do my best. So my understanding of blended impact fee is essentially, you'll remember on the previous slide up here, there was an impact fee for
a slide on that
single family housing units and multifamily housing units. So FCS generated a new fee amount for single family and multifamily, but then they used the proportion, they looked at the entire city and the proportion of multifamily units that we have, which is quite small, and then looked at the percentage of single family units and used those proportions then to create a blended fee amount. So that's, I don't know if that made any sense at all. David, you can check me if it did, but it's using ultimately the ratio that we have currently of multifamily units and single family units and those two fee amounts and proportionally bringing them together. So the ultimate blended fee amount reflects the housing makeup of the city.
When I looked at the numbers, and initially I thought that is average between 17,455 and 6360, but when you add them up divided by 2, it doesn't come to it. So
yeah,
it was not.
It would
average.
be something like what's multifamily? We've got about 10%, something like that. It'd be like 10-90 would be the ratio, something like that, and that's how they got to the blended fee amount.
And what would be the, when we say maximum fee, what does that mean?
So the maximum fee amount is what FCS, through looking at estimations of occupancy, which is something we talked about in the previous meetings, is where they think legally defensibly that's the maximum fee amount we can charge based on occupancy data. And remember that the point of impact fees is to offset the impact of the new people who are coming to live in the housing units. They're not meant to offset the size of the home. Right. So looking at occupancy data, there's a curve where it says, when you get to about 2,500 square feet of home size, occupancy doesn't keep increasing. It kind of levels off. And so at that point, that's the data is telling us that that's about the maximum point which you can expect. If a home grows, more people will come. Therefore, there would be more impact on the system.
More
Can
questions,
we give Ajay a chance here? I know he had something.
Okay. Can you go back to a couple of slides, the formula slide? I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, transportation or parks?
Go back to, no, the parks one. Yeah. Here. You know what? Let me change this one. Let's go to the table that you had. Yeah. So here, just so that I understand it, this is basically an impact fee per occupant as related to new occupants, new people who move into the location. Or is this calculated for everyone in the city right now, considering everyone in the city right now, but then will get charged only to the new occupants?
It's based you can see here right in the middle of this slide, population growth, and up here, growth in new person trip ends. So it's based on growth projections. Yep, which come from the comprehensive plan.
Great,
Yep.
great. So we base it on growth projections, right? I want to go back to the comment that was made when we started this, that it was 70 people who moved into Sammamish when 2,000 people moved into, or 20,000 people, I didn't remember, moved into Redmond. Would the calculation that you have, with the $32 million calculation that you have, see, I remember the number of the dollars much better than everything else. So the $32 million one, how wouldn't that change when we see lesser people coming in and lesser revenue coming in? And if that is the case, don't we risk ourselves to say, okay, this is the impact fee, X is the impact fee that we will have. At some point, we will have so much of construction that all of this will help, or so much of services that all of this will help, and we will get to those connectors and all those things that we have planned for. And now suddenly we see a shortfall between the two of them. Aren't we setting ourselves up for a failure with that kind of an approach?
So,
and before you say that, yeah, we will reevaluate this as we are growing, I don't even know where that metric would be to reevaluate ourselves.
however, keep in mind that the purpose of impact fees is to account for and fund proportionate share of infrastructure for new development that has to be online roughly within 6 years of when people arrive. So state law says that we have to plan for delivery of infrastructure within 6 years of when people basically move in, when a development occurs. So I think one of the challenges there is trying to predict the rate of development and trying to understand how much it takes to get a project off the ground to make the improvements, how much of that funding will be from REIT, will be from general fund tax dollars, will be from impact fees, will be from grants. And that mix is constantly changing because one thing we don't control is, there are several things we don't control, but one of the things we don't control is the rate of development.
Yeah.
Are so many factors that feed into rate of development that it's unpredictable.
Right.
Well, and I'll just add that kind of comes back to that preface at the beginning of the goal of the project here is to find a methodology that's legally defensible. And it's not to come up with a perfect model that tracks current conditions as they change. It's using an established method for predicting or estimating growth through the comp
I
plan.
am not at all questioning the method. The method is understood. It's clear. I agree with it 100%. I'm just talking of the impact fees given on the city's balance sheet when we plan for it. If now that number is in my head, $32.235 million, right? It's going to be in my head for some time. I'm not the only person. It's going to be in everybody's head to think that there is so much money that is going to be planned based on the impact fee, which means that we will plan projects based on that. And it's not that you will get the project, you will get the money, and then you will start the work. You will start doing the work assuming that that money is coming. But what when there is a trough in the number of people moving in, and suddenly your impact fee, which was based out of new people, new residents, is now not meeting that? That shortfall will have to be met by, I don't know, impact fee on existing residents. Isn't that a risk? Or would we triage the project to say, okay, we wanted to build a Southeast Fourth connector. Tough luck.
I mean, I think
Can't do that.
that is a possibility. There's always a reassessment of which projects are feasible and needed and prioritized by the council. So I mean, that's pretty much an annual process. And I think also it could be a good moment to then reassess our impact fee program and look at it with the current data at the time, rerun the formulas, come up with new fees, so we're better able to,
And that's an annual
estimate
exercise. And that will be an annual exercise.
Well, I mean, in theory, it could be. We wouldn't recommend we do that annually necessarily, and that's kind of one of the questions we talked about at previous meetings with the commission is there a cadence that makes sense? I don't think we've landed on anything in particular, but I think both of those methods is one, you could look at recalculating and estimating how much revenue you could expect through impact fees based on growth trends. Or you could scratch projects off because maybe we don't need a Southeast connector road or whatever the example is. So yeah, you're on point.
Okay. Seeing how much we love the impact fee discussion, I think if you come annually, I don't think I'll complain.
One thing to keep in mind also is that we cannot hold impact fees collected for more than 10 years, or we are obligated to refund them back to the now property owners.
Yeah. Yeah, that complicates it too, but we'll hold that for another day.
Also, the impact fee, you guys, you don't do it every year. You do it every, 5 years, 10 years?
I mean, that's been our pace currently. Yeah.
Yep.
John, did you have something?
Just so we don't forget, you want to pick up Suda first?
How about you, Suda? Any comments so far or questions?
Thank you, John. No, I'm good actually. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I always forget the online people. Somehow, Hisham managed to teletransport himself. Beam me down, Scotty.
Not gonna miss the treats.
Okay, I'm going to start off to show Evan that I did my reading assignment. The very second sentence of the introduction says, Sammamish has seen its population steadily increase over the last 5 years, period. That didn't really happen. We haven't had much growth in the last 5 years. I would ask FCS to revisit that. In the past, there's been some really fast growth, but not in the last 5 years. So let's move on to more serious stuff. So there's been some talk tonight of Redmond, Issaquah, which, by the way, were cities formed in the late 1800s. Sammamish is a relatively new community and kind of building from scratch. As many of you know, I lived up here in 1980. Tulane on 228th. Sadler's was the only store on the entire plateau. Klahani was just getting started. So our growth well, a lot of it was under the county, and then into the early years of the cities, really relied on whatever impact fees and county funding and early city funding we can get our hands on. And as we move into this decade, with our budget forecast not looking so good, impact fees become critical to our future in order to mitigate any development growth. That's just editorial on my comment. There have been some comments online that maybe we should look at more refined studies, more granular. And my supposition here is FCSG, or now FCS, went with metrics and studies that were highly defensible and could be legally held up. And I'm seeing nods from staff there. So while it might be desirable to look more deeply and more granularly, we also have to be legally defensible. Then I guess my last comment here in the range of things is having some discussion about what we do with the 30 to 80% calculation. David mentioned this in his opening remarks, that personally, I would like to see some sort of reduction or proportional reduction to make that possible as much as we can. Hopefully it's a de minimis impact to the bottom line, but that, I think in terms of our discussion tonight, that to me seems like the biggest issue. That's it.
Thanks, John. Mike?
Well, that's a good lead-in for me because the first thing I had up here was that piece around affordability. And I think that's a council decision, frankly. But what I would recommend is maybe similar to you to have a proportional from like 0 at the, 31%, and then to whatever that blended rate is at the 80%. Pretty straightforward. The second thing is, and I understand about the legally defensible, it is interesting that the tables with the impact fees show us, especially for transportation, being on the high side when our projected growth is low. So if you say, well, we've got Redmond growing like mad, and I don't know if they've done their impact fee adjustment yet or not.
I don't think so.
Maybe not, yeah. But I would wonder, and this is for the consultant, so something to ask the consultant, if it's legally defensible that we would have so many projects that support growth when we're not expecting very much growth in the comprehensive plan. It feels a little bit out of line. The blended rate, I guess I can get my arms around why and how it was calculated. But the question would be, is there a way to have a rate for single family and a rate for multifamily instead of just blending them? There's an assumption in there, which I would expect that they must have made, that the rate of multifamily construction is going to be similar to what it's been in the past. If that changes in any significant way, then maybe the blended rate isn't as beneficial. It's just a question. That's for the experts, the consultants to ask.
That's a great question.
And then this is down in the weeds a little bit. I sent a bunch of little comments about where the report was a little bit
Thin.
lacking in clarity. I would change the name of the report to the methodology, because it says study, so that it's something enduring. And the methodology should be able to be super clear, so it could be picked up in a couple of years and people really follow it. And a lot of the comments I made were like, how did they get to that? There was a leap of something or another in there. And part of my thinking in that is with just a little bit more put in the details, we should be able to do those calculations without using a consultant. So.
Those are great comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Ishan? Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I agree with what John and Mike just recommended about the scaled impact fee for those kind of homes, even though I lean towards the zero more than the higher end. But I think if you go with a scaled one, it's a reasonable approach. During the comments, Paul made a comment that I tend to agree with too about, do we need more parks? And I know I asked in the past, do we have enough parks per capita? And how does it compare to other cities? Again, I feel that we have enough parks, but this is just without having any numbers to refer to, but I bet Paul does. And the third one that I have in mind, which again we discussed the last time, it's how do you come up with the overall value of the parks? And I think when I was reviewing the document that you guys shared with us a few days ago, the value of the donated parks were included. And that was my point in the past, that those should actually offset the impact fee because it's free land. But when I looked at your overall valuation of the parks that the city currently own, you included the value of that land, which increased the cost of having new parks. That's all what I...
Two quick things for me. In terms of the comments about affordability, I think that everybody seems to be in fairly good agreement that we should consider that. I would say, I think as we do the math, we should make sure that if we're making adjustments or adding complication to the system, that it should be in a way that makes housing more affordable in a meaningful way. So I think sometimes we can get caught up in the numbers and we're talking about a $800,000 or $1 million dwelling unit house, and we're talking about $500 of reduction and creating all of this processing burden to accomplish almost something that nobody will even pay attention to. So I do think, and that's why at the 30% AMI level, whatever the number is, at that point, it's definitely more meaningful to do something. But the further you go, it's potential. There's a point in time where I think it's worth considering whether it's meaningful anymore and it's really accomplishing anything to reduce that impact fee. So that's one comment for you guys to consider in the future. The other one would be the more, so you've asked a few times about ideas about how periodically this gets revisited. It seems logical to me, kind of from a gut reaction, is that this whole exercise gets done every 5 years, so that way it kind of lines up with the comp plan. And then the sort of just redoing the table and rerunning the numbers, the more automated that can be, the more frequent that can happen. I almost sense that maybe every year might be too much because it goes by pretty quick. So maybe it's like every 2 years, there's an automatic, but again, if it's really truly automatic enough that it's just, pay the consultant to redo the table and plug the numbers in and publish them, maybe then every year is fine. But it does feel like maybe there's not, again, enough meaningful results out of that to do it every single year. It may not really change things very much. So now the only downside of my suggestion is that 2 doesn't go into 5. So there's probably something about that doesn't work very well. But I think the 5 years would be the main thing so that it kind of lines up with the comp plan and enough time has gone by to then actually do some reevaluation of what's changed in the economy and the community. But if you can more or less automate the number updates, then maybe that can be pretty frequent.
So thank you for that. The way the code currently reads in its draft form is that it automatically updates every year by way of index, whichever index we use. We talked about that with one of the commissioners. So we're going to be looking into the best index that's locally applicable to use, given that there are national indexes that don't really reflect costs here in this region. So the other thing to keep in mind is that every 5 years we're required to report out to Commerce on our Commerce, PSRC, and the county on our on our implementation of our comp plan and how many units we've produced in different AMIs, that's a good time to reflect on how much growth we've had. It kind of gets at the question that Ajay was talking about with regard to how do we know if we're funding these projects properly. So that is the 5 years does make sense. Then there's also the other, so there's really three methods of update that we currently have two, right? We don't have that 5 years in there, but we do have the annual increase that's pegged to an indexed inflation number, cost of materials, et cetera, construction cost index. The next one is the one that we've talked about, which is whenever we replace that table in there, that is the result of transportation planning work and parks planning work, right? So that every time the transportation or staff redo I'm going to get it wrong, the TFCP, Transportation Facilities,
Capital Improvement Plan and Transportation Improvement Plan.
the TCIP, the TCIP.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Blended.
I apologize. I'm not a transportation person. So whenever they do that, and that is not necessarily on a symmetrical schedule. It really depends on a wide range of things how frequently they do that. But ideally, we'd like to have the formula fleshed out so that we simply go back through it, identify eligibility, and then take a fee schedule update to the city council based on that, right? So that's the middle update. And then there's that big update that could happen in 5 years. It could also be every 10 years when we do our comp plan, because we are under GMA on a 10-year cycle for updating the comp plan. So it really just depends. I think there's a bunch of different ways to do that.
Yeah, I guess my response to that is that knowing something about how construction cost indices are put together, you could start to drift quite a ways off track. And also, I think that this table right here could actually be way more influential in the exercise of recalculating, because a new council gets elected and the list of projects changes and somebody decides, wait, we had the wrong percentage here, and whatever it is, right? That feels like that could be as influential in affecting the numbers as any 3% per year average cost index is. And so again, though, that requires effort and budget and time. And so there's got to be a balance.
Right. I think one other thing about this table that I want to highlight is that over time, our priorities as a community evolve, and so does the blend of priorities related to multimodal transportation, right? So you might start to see that more projects show up that are related to pedestrian safety or pedestrian mobility or our ped bike plan, transit. And there's a decline in the number of projects that might show up that are related to purely moving cars around the city. It really reflects the priorities, and those do change over time. So I think, that's an opportunity. And as you say, it is the most influential because that box in the lower right is ultimately what feeds into the formula.
Can I just, so this is part of the draft code, and I had a comment about that. So currently, if I remember correctly, it does talk about the inflation adjustment every year, and then further adjustments are based on what council decides. And my thinking was that there needed to be a trigger that would cause the council to at least think about whether there should be an update. And the table's that. And that should be written into the code to make that clear. Not that you have to do it, council could still decide not to bother, but if there's an update to the table, then that would be a trigger to consider it during a council meeting.
So to that point, the table's going to have to be updated every 2 years in the budget cycle anyway, correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
But
So
the project on that list has to be changed based on the changes in the TIP and the CIP.
right, and so rather than doing a inflation adjustment wholesale, I think the consensus seems to be that as this table is updated with project changes, cost changes, that's a better indicator of, and easier, because the work had to be done anyway.
So suggesting removing the index cost and the inflation, the indexed cost increase, and instead replacing it with a clear, just follow the budget cycles, which typically with a budget adoption, there is an amendment to the fee schedule that happens with that.
Right.
There is a danger to that approach, is that when you update the TIP is done at the staff level, and the staff level, they don't get into changes in the construction costs and all that to put the TIP together. They make a straight forward adjustments, let's say 10% or 20%, but they don't go actually by the cost and the construction changes. So that's the danger of that.
Yes, and if that's the case, then there are larger problems to deal with than just this. Because if our transportation plan is reflecting inaccurate.
No, it's not inaccurate. I'm saying that it doesn't have that level of accuracy, right, than using the indexing. The indexing is much more.
Okay, what else?
One small nit. Can you go back to the table? Sorry. The table, yeah. Here, the TR 115, and then I cannot see. Sahali Way corridor improvements to Northeast 8th Street to city limits. It says to city limits. I thought everything is city limits until I saw that. And I'm like, doesn't that...
I think that's saying that segment of road improvement extends from Northeast 8th up Sahali all the way to the city limits.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it is down to this. It's not all the way down to the light. It's probably down to this one.
I guess maybe, yeah.
So
Northeast 8th Street to city limits.
to city limits. So I'm like, everything is to the city limit. So I didn't know why that was called out as to city limits. So should I read something into it?
So I think one thing we could do is clarify on this table that each of these TRs corresponds to a project that is described in the city's capital facilities plan. So there is a much broader description of each of these. One of the commissioners brought in an example of a TFP, I think it was, that had a list of projects, and we have something similar, not quite as clear as that, the one that we was shown to us, but there is an opportunity to put a note on here that references where the reader could go to learn more about each of these projects. I will highlight that I am also curious about TR 11505 and why it is only 1.226 million.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know what we're getting for that great run of road for 1.226 million.
Exactly.
Right. And it's only 15% attributable to added capacity for new development.
So something, there are a lot of questions that came up on that point, but again, we'll calculate that.
One additional comment, and there's a strong desire on our part, on the consultant's part, on the commission's part, on the community's part, to want to have, a very precise, granular level model. One of the challenges that we end up with is for implementation, when we're dealing with alternative calculations or we're dealing with a developer wanting us to provide a foundation or basis that is legally defensible, that we, to some degree, need to keep it simple. We were in a meeting earlier today with the Lake Washington School District cities where we're talking about how to implement school impact fees using the bedroom count methodology. And one of the challenges is that it's so complicated that it is going to cost a significant amount of staff time to implement. One of the biggest expenses the city has in its budget is staff time. So the degree to which we add more complexity and make things more complicated, we then find ourselves then having to hire additional staff to implement that. So we're trying to find the right balance between something that is detailed enough for us to understand it and have confidence in it, but at the same time not be so granular that we can't implement it without hiring a dedicated staff person just to implement it, which might cost more than what you collect in actual impact fees.
For the Sahali one that we were just talking about, if we take it to the city limits and we don't do what's left between city limits and 202, I think it will diminish the value of what we did. Exactly. But I know that it's not part of where we can go and fix and spend Sammamish's money, but we somehow have to figure out a way to work with Redmond or whoever owns King County, whoever owns that remaining part.
Yeah, there was a really interesting study that was done a number of years ago on the stretch of 202 from 520 all the way out to what was it 244th, and it looked at those intersections. There have been past council conversations years ago about adding the gray barn down at the bottom of the hill and that the property adjoining that intersection as a potential annexation area for the city. That would necessitate moving the urban growth boundary, which is attainable. There's quite a bit of work that has to go into that. But once the city then owns the property in its jurisdiction, meaning that it's within the city's jurisdiction, we could then take over the right of way. We could then own that side of the intersection, and we'd have more of a seat at the table in that conversation. There are steps to take to do that. It's not something that I think is out of the picture, but it would take several years to achieve that.
Is there anything that a council can do at this point to expedite that process?
To do that, a community member, change the terminology, would need to file a docket request, or the council could direct staff to submit a city docket request, which would, the first step would be to pursue amendment to the comprehensive plan to modify our potential annexation areas, which we then would immediately get routed into a conversation with King County at the regional planning group, and also in the boundary review board, where we would be talking about moving the urban growth boundary. But the trigger to start that process would be filing a docket.
So just a quick comment on the Sahali Way project. What we can't see is what transportation has done to coordinate with King County. Very often in a project like that, they've already been talking to the adjoining property. I mean, you look at the boundaries between Bellevue and Redmond, you walk across the street, you have no idea who's managing that traffic light because there's agreements put in place. So I don't know if it's footnoted in the CIP or if we have to look at the county CIP.
It could also be a lot easier just to get an interlocal in place, where you have an interlocal agreement with King County to address what everybody's role is going forward with that intersection. There's other examples. The 145th Street corridor between Shoreline and Seattle is notorious because that is both it's a King County road, it's a state highway, and half of it's in Shoreline and half of it's in Seattle. And it's also identified as a major now Sound Transit route for bus service to serve the 148th Street light rail station. They were able to achieve that, and they're in the process of rebuilding the whole thing. They did figure out how to work between all those parties. So there are models where that does work.
Well, it's worth it because we've got a lot of issues about that section. We were talking about 3/4 of mile section between the city limit and the 202 signal. I have a question about one table showing that, Evan, that says transportation fee calculation method. Can you bring that slide up? Right. So in here, we're talking about the first part on the left, growth in person trip ends. Since we're talking about the number of occupants, if it goes by the number of occupants, let's say 2 years old child doesn't have a trip end, but is an occupant, how are we going to deal with that kind of situation?
So the occupancy is just used to determine the minimum and maximum fee amounts. It's not used in calculating the amount charged for the impact fee. So the occupancy is again used to it's an estimation of when a new housing unit is developed, how many people would live in the unit based on its size.
And who makes that call?
It's looking at the U.S. Census data for the region, and the occupancy then that data was used to determine the at 783 square feet is the bottom limit. You described this well last time, David, sorry to put you on the spot, but no, you can't have a half person living in a unit. We maybe take over this bit because I'm finding the 8 o'clock hour slowing myself down a little bit.
So just so that I understand, what you're saying is that this is an approximation based on the population that we are looking at and not like a per person toll.
No, you quantified. Is it trip ends number of trips?
Yeah, so that the trip ends here is an estimation of future growth, right? That is converting the estimated future growth over 20 years based on the comp plan number of 2,100 housing units, 75 people, and it's estimating of those 2,100 units, how many trips would you generate in a year based on that growth. So that's where the trip ends is. And that is a different process and a different function than what the occupancy data is doing. Ultimately, the occupancy data is looking at where to set your minimum fee amount and maximum fee amount. So they're separate but related.
Okay. Can we move on?
Yeah, that'd be great. So now we'll shift to the second portion where we talk about the draft impact fee code, and that's how we implement the impact fees. It's done locally through the Sammamish Municipal Code. And when we went through the update process with FCS, it was part of their scope to look at the existing code and make recommended edits so we can implement the scaling fees. And when they gave that back to us, and David and I took a look at what they proposed, it was all good edits, but what we realized is our current code is spread out. It's currently impact fees covers 5 different sections in 2 different chapters of the SMC. There's a lot of duplicative language kind of inherently when you repeat sections across the code. There's a lot of just language directly pulled from the RCW, copy and pasted from the RCW. So we thought this would be a good moment when we're recalculating the fees to clean up the code and come with something new. So we proposed a repeal and rewrite, which is what we'll be looking at here. And just to note, this is the first draft. We've gone through a little internal review, but our legal office is yet to take a look at this. And the idea here is we want to hear any feedback you have. We want to finish up our internal review process before legal takes a look at it. So just as a disclaimer, legal hasn't given this its blessing yet, but we hope they will one day.
So the final product would be redlining the existing.
It's a repeal
language.
replace. So we'd scratch what exists.
But you redline it, you bring it up like what you did on the code amendment.
No, the red lines would be cross out everything that exists now and look at our brand new one. So what you'll see in review will be in what you did review as Exhibit 2 is the new proposed code, just clean.
It's an entirely new numerical section that is not currently in the code. So it's a new 2106045. There are 3 other sections of code that are in completely different areas of the code that would be repealed, right? So we would repeal parks impact fees section, we would repeal transportation impact fees section, and we would repeal school impact fees section.
And deferrals. Yeah, and there's one more.
There's a 4th section.
There's 5 total.
Wow. 5 sections, and we would move all of those into one consolidated section that is streamlined and it's focused on accessibility to the average person. And it also will help with implementation because when a project pays one impact fee, they pay all of them, right? So what's happening right now is staff, community members, developers are having to go to all these different places in the code to try and understand what they have to pay for impact fees and how those work. So we're putting it in one place that is accessible. That's the idea.
Yep. So the structure here is on the right. You see the new table of contents for the draft code. In the next slides, we'll just go through each section and at a high level kind of talk about what they do. I'll ask David to stop me at any point and further describe some of the stuff that each of these sections do. But first up is purpose, authority, and limitations. And it provides the purpose statement. The goal here is to implement the comprehensive plan and the capital facilities element within. It's to respond and to follow state code that allows us to impose impact fees for funding public facilities. It describes some of the limitations and defines here, and this is really an administrative point for us, it defines which directors are responsible for making decisions about each fee type. Currently, I think it is a little ambiguous, and it often comes to David to make a decision on a parks fee. We've clarified that the parks director should make determinations regarding parks fees, public works for transportation, and community development would do school and fee administration. So that's defined right up front to help the user kind of understand who to go to regarding questions about their fees.
Can I ask you a quick question in here before we go further? Early on in one of the first slides, you briefly mentioned about fire. Who does the fire calculation as far as the impacts?
We don't assess fire impact fees in
nothing
Spanish.
at all.
Nope.
We should put a pin in that for a future conversation because that's an opportunity there.
Not tonight. So next section is applicability and service area. The RCW requires that we define a or multiple service areas, and to keep it simple, we've just defined the city as the service area for applying and using impact fees. It also establishes that we can assess impact fees for projects neighboring the city that create impacts within the city. And it further defines that the school impact fee service area correspond to each district's boundary. Anything to add there? Impact fee assessment, collection, and accounting. So this states that who is required to pay impact fees. It's an applicant seeking a development approval that will create additional demand on our systems. So that would end up excluding de minimis projects, your building permits for doing small remodels or renovations or building a fence or stuff that don't create additional demand on system capacity. It states clearly that it must be proportionate to the share of the cost of infrastructure. It establishes that credits can be awarded when applicable, like the scenarios David described earlier. And it's the first establishment of the reference of the city's fee schedule, saying that the impact fees will be incorporated and applied through the city's fee schedule. The next section is exemptions, which further lays out when impact fees don't apply. So, examples are affordable housing to continue to be defined through, and we appreciate your suggestions tonight, and we'll work with the council more on that. Public projects, schools, stuff that the city's building, minor improvements, redevelopment of equal or less value or use. Change of use resulting in no additional impacts, and a typo there. And then reconstruction after damage. Let's say you have a fire and you need to rebuild, you're exempt from the impact fees.
A question? Mm-hmm. What is minor improvement?
It's kind of like what we were talking. If I was doing something small on my house, new siding, small.
Yeah, not adding square footage, renovations.
Not adding square footage.
So the next three sections, E, F, G, I believe, are about each of the individual fee amounts. And what these sections do is just define where those fee formulas can be found and generalizes how they were calculated. They point to the impact fee, and I really like Commissioner Bresco's recommendation, the impact fee methodology as the place to go to find how these fees are calculated. It again references that the fee amounts can be found in the fee schedules, and it carries over the current council direction of implementing a 75% developer obligation for school impact fees, and that came from a few years ago, past council's direction. Impact fee rates and impact fee rate updates. This is where we make the dynamic reference to the city's fee schedule and goes through a couple of the methodologies we discussed earlier about how to update the impact fees. One was through the indexing. and then the second method which we talked about earlier was through council direction. I think we heard good feedback tonight that we should consider amending that to, following updates of the capital improvement plan, which I think makes a lot of sense. And then it also clarifies that school impact fees are updated, is it biannually? Yeah, through adopting the school district's capital facilities plans, and essentially taking their system and their fee amounts, adopting them by reference, and then starting that pass-through system that we have in place. Deferral. So here is, this section ultimately is used to create a way to delay payments of impact fees if needed by an applicant. A situation where this might apply is, let's say you have a large developer and they have a cash flow, to conserve cash flow for building, they want to defer paying the impact fees until a later date. The options we're providing is at the time of preliminary or final inspection, which I believe is also what the temporary occupancy and certificate of occupancy point, or closing of the first sale of the property. So it provides some optionality for applicants. This section defines the processes and when and the timing requirements associated with the deferrals, and also defines the deferral term, how long you can delay those payments, and what happens if you don't make the payments. And this is a process that's required by the RCW. Impact fee credits and adjustment. This is something that we kind of touched on earlier through the conversation, but it's used to provide applicants credit towards impact fees for improvements that they've made that can be attributed to adding system capacity. So I think we hit on that pretty well earlier, but this section of the code implements that. It defines the process, how credits would be assessed and awarded through an appraisal process, and how the appraiser must be credentialed, that sort of thing. And it's important to note that, again, these credits have to be awarded to capacity adding projects that are included in the CIP. Independent fee calculations. So this is a section that would be used in scenarios where the land use table in the transportation section or the applicant feel that they can't accurately capture the impact amount of their development. It's a method, it's something that's required by the RCW to give applicants that flexibility. And this section defines how that process would work. Go ahead. And how those responsibilities would be divided up in the cost for that process. Impact fee accounts and refunds. The RCW states that impact fees must be spent within 10 years of return. So this captures that, talks about that process. The RCW also requires that impact fees are held in an interest-bearing account. And it specifies that we have to do reporting. So our section includes language here that we'll report annually on the city's website, and we'll provide the council with a written report on the revenues generated from the impact fee program and the amount held in the accounts and so forth.
Question on some of the big projects, and particularly a good example is the Sahali Way. Sahali Way has a history more than the age of the city. So over the years, we've been collecting funds from developers. Have we had the case that we had to return the money that we collected for Sahali?
I'm not aware of us having to return funds yet. However, as you suggest, there has been an accrual of funds collected over time, and those funds do need to be expended here fairly soon. It is challenging to get projects off the ground, larger projects off the ground. Sometimes smaller projects might be more appropriate to move forward with that type of fee because it's something that's attainable in a shorter period.
And when the city is obligated to return the money, do you have to pay for the accrued interest on it?
You do. There is a requirement for that. And it is a lot of staff time to figure out how to calculate that, how to refund it. So we would rather not go through that. I've been through another city, I had to go through that, and it was a lot of work.
The next section is periodic review of impact fees. again, part of the conversation we had earlier, and this would apply to the fees we have control over, so parks and transportation impact fees, and defines that the impact fees would be reviewed on a periodic basis to reflect the current CIP, which I think does capture kind of the direction we had tonight. So that's good. Appeals is next. This is used when an applicant doesn't agree with the assessed impact fees or some of the decisions made by the relevant directors through the process. This section defines the appeal process, which would go through the hearing examiner, and it sets the time limits for appeals and, again, how that would work. Anything to add on that one?
Yeah, if you go back to deferral, section I just wanted to highlight that deferral is required by state law. However, state law sets a minimum requirement for deferral of 10 units. We are allowed to go beyond that. We as a city have not adopted the 10 units. We have allowed more than 10 to be deferred. But I wanted to say that is a decision point for us, that if we wanted to limit deferral to 10 units, we could. Personally, based on my experience working with developers, I don't see the benefit of limiting it to 10 units. There are some pretty stringent requirements put on property through liens that are recorded that require that it be paid prior to the property being closing at escrow, if you will. So if they want to get occupancy, they have to pay the fee. But you could also defer it. You could give them occupancy, but they can't sell the property until the lien is released as part of escrow.
Let's see, get back to where appeals. Oh, appeals was the last one. So to summarize, we talked about this earlier, but the next steps is we'll be visiting the council on February 3rd and giving a kind of their first introduction to the impact fees and the work that's done. FCS will be joining us that night. And we'll take any feedback or thoughts they have and come back to the planning commission and see where we're at. It could mean another workshop if we get some direction from council to rethink things, or if they kind of give a head nod that the direction makes sense, we could be coming back with a public hearing and looking for a recommendation. And here, I put on the slide here that the recommendation could include a number of things, like recalculating fees following CIP updates, which is something that we talked about, using that discretion to potentially reduce fee amounts as appropriate. So start kind of thinking about that in the back of your head when you're finding yourself not here on a Thursday night. You could, think about what you want to recommend. And once we get the recommendation from the commission in the spring, we'll finish the review process and adoption with the city council. And all those dates are sort of TBD, depending on council's priorities and the work plan that we roll out following the retreat. So,
are you planning to share the comments that you heard from the council, from the commission to the council? So the council know
yep. So
the things that we talked about and.
Yeah, certainly. Yep. We've been keeping the question and answer matrix as part of the packet, which I think is a great tool for, and the council will get that question and answer matrix so they could see the kind of the path we've gone through. And then when we get to the point of recommendation, we'll be sure to include, any relevant comments you want the council to know.
No, I was talking about the comments that you heard from us tonight. Would that be included in this staff presentation to the council?
Yep.
Yeah, that we're working on that agenda item internally now. So it's really timely to have this meeting tonight because that feeds directly into final drafting for that agenda item that will have to get published next Friday. Yeah.
Yep. So I think the conversation around when to update those kind of comments, the methodology for scaling or for affordable housing at different tiers, those comments will all be included in the agenda packet and part of the presentation.
And the reduction fee that Sean was talking about.
So I had a question and a comment. My question is something you said in the presentation. So are impact fees applied to somebody who puts an addition on their house?
Actually, that's something I meant to bring up too as a decision point. That is a question we have been working through, and I'm curious. Feedback is, if
my gut reaction to that, just gut reaction, is that capturing like the 90% case, anybody that adds square footage up to like 50% of their existing or some number, 30% of their existing should be excluded. I'm almost to the point of saying any addition should be excluded because first off, a big part of this calculation has a maximum occupancy based on the square footage. And so most houses are probably already there. Now we're saying, okay, you're already at 3,000 square feet. So in theory, you're at the max anyway. How are we even going to calculate an impact fee for adding a 300 square foot kitchen addition? It feels like additions should to existing housing units that are not. Now, if somebody takes a 2-bedroom Rambler and adds a second floor, you could make the argument that that affects occupancy and could affect trips and, but most of the time when somebody's adding on something, I think most houses are already at the maximum anyway or close to it. I just think there's a little trickiness there that probably should think about before trying to implement this
And
code.
we have a meeting with FCS tomorrow, and one of the items is to discuss this. And I think too, if the impact fee program is to offset the impacts of new development, if the house has been built a while ago, the impacts have been offset already potentially.
Yeah.
So we're going to look for their guidance too on if this is even feasible.
The other one is accessory dwelling units, and how do we handle accessory dwelling units? And my sense on that, and my suggestion for your consideration is that accessory dwelling units are accounted for in the total square footage of the home, so that if you had a 1,000 or a 1,200 square foot house and a 1,000 square foot ADU, you would be paying an impact fee of 2,200 square feet. And that's how that could be accounted for. You could also choose not to charge an impact fee on accessory dwelling units with the intent of trying to promote construction of ADUs in the city. That's fine too. The challenge is that there was an ADU bill that was passed that says that you cannot charge more than 50% of what the fee would be for a primary unit for an ADU. But that bill was passed the year before the scaling bill was passed. So now we have to scale it. So there is not a fixed rate for a single family residence, for example, a primary residence. But the way I see it is that an ADU, and this is a bit abstract, so I'm sorry, but an ADU fits within the square footage of a single family home. So if you are simply looking at the combined square footage of the primary unit and the ADU, that the ADU based on its size will never be more than 50% of the fee for the primary unit. So you're meeting that older ADU bill, and you're also still meeting the scaling bill. That is, I feel like we don't need to do anything, and we inherently already do that, except call out for clarity what we do with ADUs. So think about that. If you wanted to say, hey, we recommend not collecting a fee on ADUs, we could thread that into the code. If you wanted us to clarify that ADUs are included in the total square footage of the home that is being collected on within the scaled range, we could do that as well. Really just sort of at your direction now on this one. I could see it going all different ways, and don't really have an opinion on that.
I am a little bit, I hope that I'm the only one kind of confused, because I asked that question. Remember, I said that minor improvement, you said zero increase in the square footage. Is that the conversation that you had with Mark? Is that totally different setting? Or is that still under minor improvement?
I think minor improvement is still a 0 square footage.
That is different class. That's different issue.
That's more of a home renovation, right? But I think what Mark is saying is that we probably, unless there was a significant increase in square footage, be charging someone an impact fee, and maybe it's just sort of on balance moot, and that maybe we don't need to charge an impact fee for additions for existing residences.
And we don't have to spell out what is that magic number is that
Then we don't need to do that.
Beyond.
Correct. It's challenging because then what do we do with schools? Because schools, oddly, have chosen to do bedroom counts. And bedroom counts, based on all the city's feedback, are virtually impossible to implement.
There was one slide where you said that the builder has a responsibility of 75% of the impact fee.
School impact fees. Yeah. So the way the school impact fee works is basically each school identifies what the student generation rates are for each housing type that's in their capital facilities plan. They then identify what the total cost of providing school services are for, infrastructure, brick and mortar, for those students. Then they ultimately there's a formula that identifies how much of that can be attributable to new development. And then historically, the way King County set this up many, many years ago was that the developer then pays half of that. So it was a credit back to the developer, if you will. So the burden on the broader tax base to provide for brick and mortar school facilities fell on half of that. For new development, fell on the tax base. Half of that fell on the developer, instead of 100% going to the developer. Well, back in 2021, 2022, the Sammamish City Council took interest in this and wanted us to change that because it was identified that, hey, we should probably be collecting more from a developer to pay towards brick and mortar facilities for schools, given that, we have portables and flexible space that we're seeing be used for school space, and therefore the 75% is more appropriate. We didn't think we could get to a full 100% of developer obligation. Instead, we thought we could get to 75%. We are the only city that does that. So between Lake Washington, Issaquah, and Snoqualmie Valley school districts, they all use 50%. In all the other cities, we are the only city that pays that collects on the district's behalf 75% of that cost from the developer.
Doesn't that burden the schools to work more with? Sorry, my son has finished school many years ago, so I forgot the name. The temporary structures that we have.
Portables.
The portables,
Yeah.
yes. The portables that we have, instead of it being actually a capital investment project, because then the builder is going to lobby to not do this thing because he has a 75% charge that comes onto it, right?
Well, first of all, school demographics and forecasting is extremely challenging. So they are constantly forecasting out the number of students that will be moving through their system. Both Lake Washington and Issaquah are seeing a decline over time in their school populations. There is still a plug of students that are moving through the high school years that ultimately will age out of the system. Snoqualmie Valley has a much younger population, and it is seeing an increase in enrollment over time, and it is seeing a need for new brick and mortar to support that. The challenge is that as a school district, they don't want to spend their capital dollars building brick and mortar for a blip in the, a plug in the system of a cohort is just going to go away. Then they have to close a school, potentially surplus it, right? Because the school is trying to optimize, and this is something I think that often is misunderstood in the community, is that schools are trying to optimize the number of students in the classroom. They want a full classroom because it is efficient. If the classroom size goes down, well, then we're looking at combining classes. We're looking at closing schools. So when we hear community members come and say, the schools are overcrowded, well, we try to understand what they mean by that. And if by that they mean that the classes are full, that's by design. If it means that we are taking flexible space in the school and using it for classroom space, or that we are moving portables onto the site that is taking up recreation space or parking and is not permanent space, well, then that means the school is probably over full and they're trying to account for more classroom space. So there's all these things that are going on at the school level. We don't control that. What we're trying to do is make sure they have adequate funding to build the brick and mortar when they do decide to build it.
Got it. Thank you. And here I thought it was a very simple thing.
My other comment was, as you go through this, and especially maybe with council, I think it'd be good to try to articulate how much of this code is addressing the requirement that we do scaling of our fees, and what else is there in here that is, and maybe the answer is nothing. I'm not sure that I know, but what else in here is not that, but it's through the process of cleanup, we realized that we never had fees on renovations, right? And whatever it is, so that people can get their mind around, okay, the purpose of this started out being to respond to the legislature's requirement that we scale the fees. And then we saw we needed to clean up our code. And as part of that, here's the list of things that are changing, because those are really decisions that are being made in this process that are a little obscured by the way it, when you take old code and create new code and all that, those things are hard to pick out for, let's say, the layperson. So I would just suggest as that gets reviewed with the council and the future planning commission, that somehow you try to articulate that a little bit.
That's great feedback.
Other comments or questions?
I've got a question. So, and this has to do with the account for the impact fees. Say a development goes up in the southeast corner of Sammamish, and there's no roads improvements put in that area, but it's Englewood Hills improved, nowhere close to that. Is that something that would then have to be refunded because impact fees had been paid and no project impacted or was put in place in the vicinity of the development that was done? Is that part of the bookkeeping that has to occur?
Can you go to the section that talked about service areas? So that'd be the second slide, I think. Yeah. So Sammamish historically has, and at this point we're not proposing to change this, has one service area. It is the entire city.
So that answers that.
Yeah. So an impact fee that's collected based on this model of service area, anywhere in that service area can be applied anywhere in that service area.
Okay, cool. And that's clear. So the reason I was asking is as I was looking at the impact fee accounts, it wasn't referenced to the service area, but those who know this stuff really well might understand and know that.
And what's interesting is there's a whole nother consideration about equitable distribution of impact fees collected, right? So having one service area simplifies that. There are other cities that have different service areas where you have to look at how to allocate the impact fee to different service areas. There's equity questions involved in that. It's more challenging. Ours is a fairly simple system. Not arguing either way that, just noting that it's fairly simple compared to some others.
Yeah. Well, it's good to keep it simple. And just playing off of the keep it simple, because there's discussion about the ADUs. It feels to me like they could just be applied based on the square footage. And a lot of them are going to be small anyway, so it's a relatively small impact fee, which doesn't have that big of impact on the affordability. Lots of impacts in there. And the same thing around remodels for the numbers that would be in place to bookkeep and determine if, like I've now put a second story on, does that add enough? It just feels like for the amount of money we would collect, it's not worth the staff time to do that. So it'd be nice to have all the money we could, but there's a cost with getting that. So my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Good
Look at
stuff.
your last meeting. It's 8:29.
Not quite done yet. Anything else from you guys?
No, our next meeting, just as a FYI, our calendar is it's unset at this point, essentially, because we're waiting for the council retreat in early February to kind of understand where they want us to go work plan wise. So when we get direction there, we'll start putting things on the commission calendar. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 5th, and I think we have some ideas of good topics we can start moving forward with for that meeting, but just that's an FYI. Otherwise, nothing else from staff.
Sorry, all I heard was a buzzing in my ear when you said that. All right. I did just want to say, as I gavel out for the last time, I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to work with all of you and for your participation in these last years. and for the opportunity to serve the citizens in Sammamish. It's been an interesting experience and a lot of good things. I also want to just leave a word of encouragement for all of you. Sometimes we get down in the weeds of some of these issues and we forget how important it is, the work that a planning commission does. And without sounding melodramatic, I would say that I often think to myself that the work that we do is kind of the front line of democracy. It's participation by the people in the community, and it has an influence over the community. So don't forget that even though sometimes we're talking about 5G and sandwich board signs, the work that you do is really the starting place for the future of our community. So thank you, and have fun without me. Would someone move to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ajay.